everyone. We're halfway to the weekend, and I hope you all are staying cool out there. It's been really hot for an enormous amount of people, both in the United States and beyond. It really makes this year's observation of Air Conditioning Appreciation Days all the more relevant. Now, while you're hopefully staying cool somewhere, we're all set to learn about the next generation of connected communities utility programs that are happening right now. These new programs reward builders and homeowners with valuable incentives to enable homes that can shift consumption to align with times when renewable energy is available. Now, our guest is going to help us figure out how to tap into these opportunities and provision your homes to take advantage of this new era of clean energy programs. Joining us today for his Green Builder Media debut is Tom Hines, a residential energy efficiency expert with more than 20 years of experience in program design, implementation, and evaluation. From 1997 through 2014, Tom worked with the Arizona Public Service Company in designing, developing, and managing the company's portfolio of residential energy efficiency programs, including new homes, existing home HVAC systems, home performance, consumer lighting products, pools, multifamily, behavioral conservation, and energy efficiency financing programs. Now, Tom has designed, developed, and managed multiple award-winning energy efficiency programs, including the APS Energy Star Homes program and the APS Home Performance with Energy Star program. Now, before we hear from Tom, I wanted to tell you about PowerShift by NV Energy. It's a program that helps residential and business customers conserve energy and save money on their power bills. PowerShift is a one-stop resource to find energy-efficient products and services. For more information, please visit nvenergy.com/PowerShift. Now, during the course of today's presentation, you can submit questions for our guest. Simply use the questions box that you see on the right side of your screen. I'm going to review those questions and pose those to Tom during the Q&A time that we've set aside after his presentation. All right, Tom, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mike. Just checking you can hear me okay?
Sounding good, sir.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mike, and everyone at Green Builder Media and everybody who's here on the line for this presentation today. I'm really excited about this topic. As Mike said, I've got about almost a 30-year career now in really working mostly in the utility industry, but trying to use that work with home builders, with the building industry, both retrofit and new homes. Longtime member of the Energy Efficient and Environmental Building Alliance on their board, ResNet member. So a lot of work in my career interacting between the built environment and the utility system and the grid. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of a new generation that we're seeing in utility programs. It's focused not only on energy efficiency, but also on creating what we call virtual power plants that act like a power plant that can be dispatched, but it's demand that's being dispatched in the time when there's need for like peak load management. And so it's much more dynamic than energy efficiency and has a lot more resource value for utilities these days. And I want to make sure that folks in this audience understand all the opportunities and where this next generation of programs is going to head and how you can benefit and your homeowners that you work with can benefit. So what we call it is helping smart homeowners get paid to flex their energy use. And I'm going to talk about how that's a real thing, not only today, but will be more so into the future. So just a little bit about my company. I work at a company called Sierra Resource Consultants. I'm one of the founders and principals of the company. We started in 2013 with the idea of really trying to optimize the utility system around efficiency and think through like the entire holistic way that we're going to get to 100% clean energy. Most of the clients that we work for are utilities and government organizations who are focused on getting to 100% carbon-free energy goals in the future. And so we do everything from policy to strategy to program design to evaluating programs and ultimately understanding how to innovate programs to get to the next generation that we need to get to in terms of clean energy. And so we really like to kind of drive that innovation. And so this is something that we've been working on that we feel is really something that the building industry can take advantage of. And so let me go to the second slide here. And what I'd like to do is start digging in. And I'm going to start digging in by talking a little bit about the energy industry and some real revolutionary trends. I've been in the energy industry for almost 30 years, and we are at a really revolutionary point in the industry. It's a point that I got into the industry to try to influence, and so it's exciting times, but it's also challenging times for the utility industry in terms of meeting ongoing clean energy needs, affordability needs, and reliability needs from customers. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this, but I want to make sure that everything that we think about is applied back to what matters to you as a builder or a renovation contractor who's thinking about ways to improve the efficiency of the built environment. So these 10 trends I've kind of organized according to climate, utility policy, the power grid itself, and what's changing about the grid and customers. So first, climate. It's really, no news to anyone that we've gone from much more predictable weather conditions to more extreme weather events. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, where it is going to be 118 degrees today. I think that's the second highest all-time temperature recorded in Phoenix. We've had 17 or 18 days in a row over 110. Phoenix is hot, but this is extreme. And what we're seeing is certainly, a lot of what we would call 100-year weather events are happening at a frequency of more like a decade. So what that does for utilities who have to plan for the need for energy is it creates higher peak demands. It also, we have more extreme weather events like storms that are also impacting utility reliability. And so utility planning, where utility planners have to plan typically 15 to 25 years into the future, has become much more difficult to try to identify how do you meet resource needs when there's a lot more uncertainty in future weather conditions. So the other thing, overlay all of these things that are happening at once. So in the utility policy space, we've gone from, in history, really just thinking about how to generate electricity that was the most reliable and affordable. And now we're really thinking about clean in a new way. And so historically, no carbon policies. And now and into the future, you see both states and individual utilities who have adopted goals or mandates to decarbonize and have 100% clean energy by 2015 or 2050 or sooner. The earliest are at 2030, which is 7 years away. And then, in the utility scale, that's like an overnight change in the utility system. So very aggressive decarbonization goals, which means retiring some current generation and then bringing on a lot of new clean energy resources in a very, very short period of time, which has a ton of different implications on the system. We've gone from really thinking about multiple fuels to, for both transportation needs and building needs. And really, for now and in the future, you see both states and utilities and utility policy organizations calling for future electrification, again, around that goal of decarbonization. And just to give you a sense of the scope, about 65 to 75% of all US customers today, their utility today has already made a commitment to decarbonize by 2050 or sooner. So this is the vast majority of US utility customers have a utility that has made this commitment already. So again, exciting times for somebody like me who's been promoting clean energy for a long time, but it means a lot of things are changing in the industry very quickly. The other thing is, moving from really, in the past when I started my career, typically utilities had a service territory where they were the only provider in that service territory. Now in the future, and in the recent past, you've seen things like deregulation, where other providers can enter a market, and it's not just one utility. A new federal ruling came down called FERC 2222 that allows for consumer devices and consumer energy to be bid into wholesale energy markets for the first time, and not just use retail utility rates, but potentially bid in capacity to wholesale markets. So that's a big game changer that's just occurring now. In California and many other states, they've started a new type of utility called a community choice aggregator, and that gives customers in that local service territory the option of choosing from their legacy utility, or possibly having their generation or their energy generated by an alternative supplier, typically an alternative supplier that's already 100% clean energy. And then this real advent and growth of distributed energy resource, or DER aggregators. I'm going to talk a lot more about distributed energy resources. And these aggregators are companies that many of us, hear their names on a daily basis. Google, Tesla, Generac, and many others who are in some cases much larger than any utility in the United States. And what they're doing is they're increasingly thinking about aggregating all of the different consumer devices and energy using appliances that they've sold to provide demand side management and even supply side on the solar side with aggregators like Sunrun. And so again, from a monopoly to lots of different ways that energy comes into the system, which makes the system a lot more complex. Then thinking about the grid itself, we've gone from very centralized energy generation power plants that were sending energy out to customers. And now distributed generation is starting to become more and more part of the picture, where rooftop solar systems and other wind generators and others throughout the service territory are moving energy back and forth, which has created the situation that we go from one-way power flow on all the utility transmission system to two-way power flows that are happening to and from users. The grid was not actually designed to do that. And so we're changing that in one generation of time. We're changing that whole cycle of how the grid was built, which means that in many cases, what we're having to do in the past, we built supply to meet what we forecasted for the energy demand. And now we are adding more and more intermittent clean energy supplies. When I think about solar, which produces energy wonderfully in the middle of the day, not so much in the morning and the early evening, and then not at all at night. We don't have enough storage to store all that energy. And so we now need to manage demand to try to accommodate that intermittent supply. When a cloud comes over or when solar goes down, we need to be able to flex demand to match that. As a result of all those things, what we've seen is a very highly reliable grid, one of the highest reliable grids in the world, and reliability has actually been declining both in the United States and in Europe as a result of a lot of intermittent supplies, more extreme weather, and the move to electrify a lot of things, and that is only increasing with electric vehicles. So peak demand on the grid is increasing. Utilities need to do a lot more to manage that. And so that's where customers come in. Number one, in the past, there was very little competition for customers in a regulated monopoly type market. Now there's a lot more competition for those customers. And at the same time, in the past, there was kind of customer disinterest, and now there's a lot more savvy energy users. And meanwhile, utilities, if you look at utility integrated resource plans, many of them for the future are counting on customer-sited resources supplying a quarter or more of their energy. So again, we are just getting into a future where we're going to see a lot more of sort of trading energy between consumers and central power plants on the grid. Next slide. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys a bit of a snapshot to say a lot is changing on the grid. So the next is, what's that requiring utilities to do about it? I mentioned that utilities are much more in need of help from customers on the demand side as the supply becomes more intermittent and less predictable, and demand actually becomes less predictable due to climate. What utilities need to do is work with customers to try to be able to create more flexible demand. And so what is starting to be developed are what we call virtual power plants. And virtual power plants are comprised of aggregating a lot of customer-sited resources together into something that can be dispatched that looks like a traditional power plant, but in fact is managing demand. So this is I pulled this chart here on the right from a recent utility industry article. And what it shows is that traditionally, utilities have really focused their energy efficiency programs and some demand response programs on the very energy proactive customer that's sort of the one side of the bell curve, and really had not really sought to engage as much with the vast majority of customers who, again, were kind of customer who were not that interested in managing their energy use on a daily basis. And so what utilities need to do now, if you look at the squares on the left, is engage with new clean energy resources, many of them sited at customer sites, rooftop solar, battery storage, and other distributed energy resources. Utilities are thinking and employing a lot of new dynamic rate designs to try to use economics to encourage customers. It's basic supply and demand. And utilities have to manage the supply and demand instantaneously at all times. So can they use different rate designs, much more time differentiated rates? You're going to see a lot more time of use rates and even demand rates being applied to residential customers to encourage customers to shift load off of that peak. They can manage their energy costs as a result, and they reduce costs for all customers on the grid when they do that. So as a result of all that, lots of new customer programs and customer programs that are much more dynamic and have like ongoing interactions with customers to help manage their in-home devices for the betterment of that customer as well as the grid. To do that, you need lots more customer engagement. Typical utility energy efficiency programs have been, I'm going to give you a rebate once when you purchase that piece of equipment. We put it in, it runs. I don't have to think about engaging with you on an ongoing basis. So utilities need to think about retaining customers in program, enrolling them, engaging them, retaining them, and positioning really for more energy management options in the future. So that's kind of setting the stage now for, well, what does that mean for folks within the green building industry? How can you help your interested consumers find out more about these and actually take advantage of these programs? So we'll go to the next slide. Before I dig into the opportunities, what I wanted to talk about really quickly here is just set the stage for you all in terms of, I've mentioned the term demand response a couple of times, and I know everyone here is familiar with energy efficiency, but I'm not sure if folks, demand response is much more a utility industry term. But what it means is literally, will the demand out there that I see on the grid from individual homes and businesses, can I influence that demand, and will it respond to whatever it is that I create in a program to try to influence that demand? And that is typically done either to manage the very, very peak of energy use at the hottest or coldest day of the year. And increasingly, it's also being done to manage extremely low load conditions on the grid. And what we mean by that is load, net load, being supplied by traditional resources on the grid and not being supplied by customer-sited solar. So there are times now on the grid when we see actually backflow of energy back to the generator. And that causes a number of issues on the grid around voltage and frequency support and other things that can cost a lot to manage. And if you don't manage those things, they can result in negative consequences for customers. And so with things like outages and things like actually damaging equipment if you get outside of voltage ranges of things. So what utilities need to do is think a lot more about how they engage with customers to have this instantaneous demand flexibility. There are three main approaches that utilities take. I'm going to actually start with the one all the way on the right, because that is the simplest. I call it kind of old school demand response. And that is simply working with consumers through some kind of a feedback mechanism. In the past, it was literally like a call to conserve on a peak day, a voluntary call. We are doing that today with programs where we're actually designated energy saving days, like 5 of the peak days in the summer. But more and more, we're working with technologies like whole home energy monitors that are helping customers to see their instantaneous demand, and using that and tips that we can create on those that are very customized proactive tips that say, if you did this, you could better manage your energy use for both the grid and your own purposes. And again, those are great. And that feedback loop is what customers really need to be able to manage their costs. But it's even more powerful when it's actually linked with something around a time of use rate. So if I can now give you real-time feedback and appliances that can actually manage to those rates, then I don't have to think about it so much, right? I can get a proactive message to say, do this right now and you'll save, or my appliance directly makes that adjustment to save me based on the utility's rate. And so I've done a lot of work with Arizona Public Service. Arizona Public Service currently has over 60% of their customers who have enrolled in one of these time of use rates. And those customers do an amazing job of managing around those rates. And I have a lot of data that shows that customers get it, and they are already programming their devices like smart thermostats to manage around those rates. And certainly you see most electric vehicle manufacturers have some type of a delay for charging, so that you can delay that charge until the peak period, or the peak period is over. What's interesting about that is if every vehicle decides to charge right at 7 p.m. when the peak period ends in a particular utility, you're actually going to create a new peak. And so static rates are not quite enough to manage what's a very dynamic, flexible system. And so ultimately, where utility programs are going is, number one, we're trying to use all of these approaches, but the one that provides the most real-time flexibility and the one that we consider really truly a virtual power plant is a direct dispatch program. And the way those programs typically work is the utility will send a signal through the cloud to some kind of an aggregation provider. So that is what I've called here and what we typically call a DERMS platform. I'm trying to stay away from too much jargon, but I thought DERMS is interesting. DER is what we said earlier, distributed energy resources. And so for a utility, they will contract with a provider for a DERMS platform, and that is a distributed energy resource management system. All that system does is aggregate a number of devices across different device classes. Like I could have one DERMS that manages all the smart thermostats, all water heater controls that are connected, and all batteries. And all three of those different programs puts them on one pane of glass for my operator to be able to see them, to be able to control them and dispatch them. And the way that those are managed is through terms and conditions with participating customers. Customers get paid for providing that capacity, and a certain number of event times per year that they would participate. And those payments can really add up for customers to significantly reduce energy costs. And in the case of most of these, customers don't even notice when events are actually being dispatched. So this is really the thing that's the most growing area of this new virtual power plant concept, where utilities will be working with devices. By the way, the utility doesn't directly manage those devices. They're typically working through the aggregator, who then works with the device partner, who is the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer usually. So I do programs where, I have Google, Nest, Honeywell, Emerson, and a number of other different thermostat brands. They're all managed on the same platform, but all of those signals go back to the original device manufacturer, and they're the ones that make the adjustments down to the home level. And so that's the way these work, and the way that customers actually end up being directly rewarded in exchange for maybe a 2-degree thermostat adjustment that at scale can provide hundreds of megawatts for utilities. So just wanted to go through those 3 primary approaches that utilities are using, and this will get important as we kind of think about what the opportunities are for builders. Next slide. All right, I know it's a builder and builder market, so I want to talk about the built environment, right? And so here we've got a home in the center, whether it's a new home or a retrofit home. I wanted to talk about all these different devices, but I want to start with the home. And first of all, these devices are all potentially connected energy-using products that utilities are now seeing as DERs, or distributed energy resources, that can be dispatched and change the customer's load shape, or the way that they use energy, to benefit all customers on the grid, and actually to benefit that participant in terms of getting paid or getting a reduced bill through TOU rate savings. So the first thing is, I want to make sure that everyone understands, I believe energy efficiency is sort of the glue that holds all this piece together, particularly when we're talking about thermal envelope things, right? We talk about making adjustments to smart thermostats. The thing that works best with that is when you have a good thermal envelope, you have reduced duct leakage, minimal infiltration, and you have a home that's built in a way that it can be more flexible in the way that it uses energy. In other words, think about it this way. It needs less frequent inputs of energy to maintain comfort on extreme weather conditions. Okay, you guys are building those homes today. So those homes are the natural candidates to then think about adding more value by installing connected devices and enabling consumers to take advantage of this energy revolution. And so I'll just kind of go around the horn here and talk about how each one of these could be dispatched and how it would work, right? So electric vehicles, a lot being managed today around rates, but as we talked about, the utilities are very concerned that eventually, if it's just a rate, then all consumers are going to set their vehicle to charge right after that rate ends, and we're going to actually create a new peak. Electric vehicles are the newest, largest load increase in the utility industry since the 1950s electrification, in terms of a new device and a new energy end user that's going to require lots of energy generation. And so ways that we can, so number one, thinking about EV pre-wiring, so that making sure that homes are set up for EV, for electric vehicle charging in the first place. And then trying to manage that charging. So installing connected charging infrastructure, and ways that we can proactively manage with customers to say, when do you need your vehicle? We'll make sure you have a minimal charge in place, and then we may delay when when we charge it until not right after the peak period, but maybe when carbon's lowest over the middle of the night. So it's a way that we can kind of work together to create a better clean energy future. And in a way that an electric vehicle that is a storage on wheels can actually use that energy, draw energy from the grid when it's the most cost effective and the least carbon intense. So, and then eventually thinking about how electric vehicles, the vehicle to grid or vehicle to home, and ways that that is truly an energy storage mechanism on the grid. And so that is really the sort of the most nascent in a way. Smart thermostats, on the other hand, is the one I work with a partner called Energy Hub at Arizona Public Service, and Energy Hub has now aggregated about 1 million total devices. The vast majority of those are smart thermostats across the United States. So Energy Hub is an aggregator that works with many, many of these utilities, but they're only one of many aggregators. And so just that one aggregator has already aggregated over 1 million of these distributed energy resources. So it's already a very, very real way that utilities are meeting resource needs. Matter of fact, in Arizona, we called smart thermostats 4 out of the last 5 days, and consumers responded, and it was a way that we maintain reliability and affordability on the grid. So smart thermostats, again, I talked about this as just small thermostat adjustments that collectively, when you think about the 80,000 thermostats that are enrolled in the APS program, that collectively looks like over 100 megawatts when we dispatch all those at once. 100 megawatts is basically 2 peaker plants for utility that did not need to get built. That's how we get to clean energy in the future. So smart thermostats have been the most scaled. They also have the most customer impact if we're not thinking hard about comfort. We do a lot of things like pre-cooling homes sometimes, and certainly thinking about ways with both home performance contractors and new home builders that we build the flexibility into the thermal envelope of the home to allow that thermostat adjustment without real big comfort impacts. The next one I'll touch on is water heating controls. In Arizona, again, and in some states, not a big impact on peak, but water heating, by moving water heating around, it provides a very low cost storage mechanism. Water heating tanks are a thermal storage battery, essentially, that is installed in pretty much every home today. So let's use those to help balance the grid. On new homes, we're really thinking more about installing electric heat pump water heaters. And on existing homes, can we do retrofit controls on existing electric resistance tanks? And again, use those to shift energy around rates, around carbon, and around peak, as well as integrating solar. So can we dispatch water heating when there's too much solar on the grid? Utilities have to balance demand and supply at all times. And at times in the US today, we're actually curtailing solar that we can't use because there's no place to put it. So we're putting a lot of that energy into water heating tanks today in the middle of the day. Rooftop solar and advanced inverters, again, that's where a lot of the energy generation of the future is going to come from. The advanced inverters allow us to do things like regulate frequency and voltage and other things on the system. that are important, particularly as solar is an intermittent resource. And then finally, battery storage, reducing peak, using those batteries to actually take energy from the grid when we have too much solar on the grid and we don't know where to put it. And so really flattening that overall grid kind of load shape with all of these devices. But batteries, what we call the Swiss Army knife of distributed energy resources, because they can create load and they can reduce load at the same time. Okay, next slide. And so quickly, I wanted to touch on this, that why? Why are utilities doing this? We talked about it because they need it. And they need it for these things on the right that customers really value. Number one, it's table stakes for utility. You have to be safe and reliable. Number two, you want to be affordable and to try to produce energy as efficiently as possible so that customers can take advantage of affordable electricity. And increasingly, we want to do that, and customers value doing that in a way that's using clean energy resources. We can also drive bill savings if we're able to match consumption with those clean energy resources, because those clean energy resources, by virtue of the way that they're set up, they don't have fuel costs. And so they're typically not only low carbon, but low cost. Once that capacity is built, we want to use all of that energy we can. Then on the grid side, when we think about it, all of that translates really into locational value. So if we can think about where all these DERs are on the grid, the transmission and distribution system can benefit by being able to dispatch them flexibly and make sure that we're not overstressing a particular transmission or distribution system feeder or substation or transformer, or in cases of low load conditions, balance that out so we're not having voltage issues. Demand reduction value across the board reduces future capacity costs, and that capacity value we can bring from distributed resources. If it's less expensive than building that from a centralized power plant, we're helping to reduce the total cost of service while meeting our energy needs. And then finally, it's clear you see the environmental value from clean energy, and then the energy value when we optimize usage around when we can use that essentially free kilowatt hour that's coming from renewable generation. So that's kind of a little bit about the value stack, and again, why utilities are going to be forced to move harder into these kind of programs in the future. Next slide. And so kind of coming all the way back full circle, I promised you I would get it to what matters to you guys. So hopefully, and if you have any questions about all the stuff I just presented on the grid, please chat those in. I'd love to make sure I clarify anything. I try to go through a lot of pretty hardcore utility side planning stuff in a very quick period of time, because I think it sets the stage for this is different. I've done utility energy efficiency programs for 25 plus years, and the last 5 years has been significantly different in how we're thinking about this and in the opportunities that I think it creates for the building industry. So I wanted to pause here and just talk about some direct benefits for builders and contractors, and then some benefits that you can translate for your buyers to make what you do more valuable in the market. And on the left, this is actually a recent article from a couple of years ago from PV Magazine that actually talks about the household scale virtual power plant has arrived. So there's that VPP or virtual power plant I was talking about. And not surprisingly, look, there's the home, there's all the things we just talked about. There's your HVAC load, which is controlled by a smart thermostat, your electric vehicle, your water heater. See all those little Wi-Fi symbols, all of them Wi-Fi connected, battery storage, distributed PV. That is all being aggregated up through in a DERMS or distributed energy resource management system, and ultimately being integrated into the utilities, what they call ADMS or advanced distribution management system. That is the software for utilities that controls the grid on a minute or second by second basis, right? So balancing at all times. And so you're integrating these distributed resources right into that system so that they look to they're visible to the utility, they're manageable by the utility. if you think about a traditional energy efficiency, we installed stuff, we were blind to it, we hoped it was there when we needed it, but it wasn't truly viewed as a resource because you didn't see it and you could never really control or manage it. That's the game changer here. And so for builders and contractors who recognize this, and I'm going to talk to you about a project that we're just starting that I think is going to show you even more about how we get there and where we're going in terms of brand value, ESG leadership, particularly on the, for home builders and those who are in the looking for investment dollars. Investors are very, very interested in what are you doing to manage this issue. Leaders in the future will be ones who have been able to address this because there's a big opportunity here to add value. I always point out to builders, this will be coming in codes. I had a slide in here and I ended up taking it out to save some time, but the last codes forum last year, there was a whole section on DERs in future codes. So DERs will be showing up more and more in codes. We'll take advantage of the opportunity to really, market these things to your home buyers before it just becomes standard practice. It allows you to help demonstrate performance and just demonstrate ways that, you can return value back to your homeowner. And return value in a couple of different ways, right? First of all, reduced operating costs, improve comfort, and then the ability to not only take advantage of upfront utility incentives like we have in the past with energy efficiency, but also ongoing utility incentives for the lifetime of your home that reward you for being able to flexibly use energy. And you can see, I'm going to show you some examples where those kind of incentive dollars can add up to some significant energy bill savings for consumers over the life of the home, making that home a more valuable investment for them and a more affordable investment. Next slide. Okay, so thinking about this in terms of opportunities, and like I said, I wanted to give you a range, and it is a range. The thing that's challenging about this is that utilities have different needs in their service territories. Each state has a different regulatory policy body, and all of this energy policy, unfortunately, takes time. And as a result, it becomes a bit of a puzzle for folks who are outside the industry. One thing that my company tries to do is make this easy for folks who want to lean in. We want to make it easy to translate how utility programs work and how you as a home builder or a contractor can benefit. So I'd love to hear anything and follow up with me afterwards. I'll put my contact info in here about, how we can make sure that this isn't trying to read a foreign language for you, but that we really think about how because I really believe that you should be thinking about what are the best utility opportunities that make sense for me today and kind of let's prioritize together. So just thinking about this, first of all, you've got utility incentives for energy efficiency upgrades. And those are a wide range. Generally, like for new construction, what you see is a lot of the utility programs are built either around some kind of a HERS score or Energy Star. And so across the industry, the low end is probably about $200. The high end goes above $2,500. And that's probably for like an Energy Star to Energy Star Plus kind of level of performance. But it's very significant. And that's just for the energy efficiency component. So then add on top of that many utilities are now adding prescriptive incentives. By the way, most of the energy efficiency today, most are more like a performance-based incentive. Like I said, like you achieve a certain HERS score or even a certain other energy model score. But then in addition, many utilities are now adding prescriptive incentives for those specific distributed energy resources that they really want to see installed, because that's going to enable a customer to take advantage of these kind of programs, right? So the first, sort of a barrier to participation for a customer is having the device that allows them to participate. And so you see a very wide range here. And the reason is because there's a very wide range of costs associated with DERs. Smart thermostat, probably the low end at as low as like $50 for the new Amazon smart thermostat, where batteries are thousands. and I put $400 plus for batteries, you could see up to $5,000 from utility in some cases. These are added on top of your EE incentives. And so think about that in terms of what you're installing and what you may or may not be taking advantage of today, and find out what you may be missing out on. Then that's on the builder side up front, and then or a renovation side. Then think about from the standpoint of what your homeowner could potentially participate in the future if they have these enabling technologies and have interest in helping to balance energy on the grid and getting paid for it. Most thermostat programs are running at somewhere between $35 and $100 a year for customers. Customers can opt out of events if they're ever uncomfortable. So literally, you don't ever have to be uncomfortable in one of these programs, and you're going to get paid. For batteries, incentives are much richer, and generally the range is between about $500 and $1,500 a year. Those are going to be usually more events, but typically consumers don't even know when those events are happening, and the utilities will typically leave a certain amount of energy in the battery at all times for the consumer to use in case of an outage. So consumers still get to see their resiliency benefit from battery, but get this additional benefit from the utility. And then EVs, kind of in the range of $200 to $400 a year, again, for just agreeing to let the utility kind of delay when I might charge that battery of my EV till later in the evening, and kind of optimize for low cost and carbon. And so those are ongoing yearly for the life of the home that the consumer can take advantage of. And when you start to add some of these things up, you can see that you can save like 50% of your energy costs when you really add all of these things up, or more, as a consumer. We talked about time of use rates a little bit. And one of the things that I'm really working on is these same enabling technologies that enable demand response or dispatchable programs also help enable customers to make it easy to manage their energy use around retail on peak rates. So just have your thermostat or your battery or your water heater adapt to that rate to say, I'm going to heat the water before that peak period, or I'm going to cool or heat your home before that peak period, and then kind of try to coast as much as possible through the peak. Or I'm going to, dispatch my battery on peak to reduce my peak consumption. I see sometimes as much as 50% savings just from this alone from customers, depending on the rate plan and the lifestyle, and how savvy a customer is about it. And so, again, what I'm trying to kind of give you is this can be a very, very, very lucrative market when you start to pancake all of these different incentives. And then finally, there are significant dollars available through both tax credits and rebates in both the Investment Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So those are just icing on the cake of all the other things. Next slide. A little bit about how you can take advantage of these. First of all, like I said, you need to do a little bit of your homework. I would make sure that you don't try to go after everything at once, but look at the things that most fit your business model, and like, what are the utility programs and tax credit opportunities I want to focus on? And then what are the key technology parameters I have to think about if I'm thinking about installing any of these things, right? Requirements and things. And that's really important to make sure that you're matching what's required in programs and in the tax credits. Engage with your local utility or utilities for those who build across the country. Online, the utility program reps, particularly like the home builder contact reps. Local raters often have a lot of this kind of information, and other like trade ally groups and programs. It pays to kind of to start talking and figure out where those opportunities lie within each different utility, because they're not all the same, unfortunately. And then I think one thing that gets overlooked is like, put an efficient process in place at your company to make sure that you understand how you're getting paid, how you're collecting, what's required, and to just put that on autopilot. I often see that it's like pulling teeth sometimes to, go back and forth on this stuff. The savvy contractors and builders put a process in place, they designate it and make sure that it happens. And then you should make sure you're marketing the value of all these programs to your customers, and all three of the potential value streams. One, educate customers about the energy efficiency you've installed and what it enables for them, inform them about utility time of use rates and ways they could slightly shift their energy and really lower their monthly costs. And then I really think there's a future where we work with home builders to actually help enroll customers with these enabling technologies directly into utility demand response programs and get them paid. And I think that'd be a really cool future where you're helping your customer access these programs and making it real for them, reducing their cost of home ownership from day one. Next slide. So for the next about 15 minutes or so, I'm going to cover what we're working on as a new project. That's a DOE grant that'll give you guys, I think, an idea of how one of the largest utilities in the world is thinking about this and putting together a program for a connected communities future. And then we'll turn it over for question and answer. So about a year ago, or a year and a half ago, we were one of the teams that applied for a DOE grant, Department of Energy grant, that there were 10 teams selected. We were one of those 10 teams. I think a total of about $70 million in funding. Our project is a $10 million project with about $6.7 million in funding from the DOE. It is called the Advanced Connected Communities Collaborative Project. It's a bit of a tongue teaser, but it is, or we call it AC3. And it is in North Carolina. Our partnership, I'll give you all the different partners in this, but Duke Energy is one of the large partners in this project. We are helping them build flexible, particularly winter peak capacity, particularly as they provide more large-scale solar generation in the summer. They're finding that they have more winter peak needs because there's less solar available on winter peak mornings. So we're trying to build that capacity through demand side, better integrate renewables, encourage adoption of distributed energy resources, and ultimately in service of Duke's 100% clean energy commitment by 2050. So we'll be connecting thousands of distributed energy resources. I'll go over those and talk about them. Total of about 3.6 megawatts of flexible capacity just from this project. Lots of annual energy savings as well. And it's really a project to demonstrate what could be done. We're using 500 new homes and 500 existing, both single family and some multifamily, mostly owner occupied on the new homes. On the existing homes, we're actually looking at both owner occupied and a lot of rental properties, because we feel like that is one subsegment of the market that has been underserved. And so from an equity standpoint and just size of that market, I think it's an important one to address. $10 million total project budget, and we've got a project timeline through September 2026. So next slide, I'll dig in a little bit more to the project partners. And so I mentioned Duke Energy, and then we have a research team that consists of my company, Tierra, Ibicus, who many of you are probably familiar with, great building science company, and National Renewable Energy Lab, and then the E3, Energy and Environmental Economics, will be helping us with valuation of distributed energy resources. We have two home builder partners, Mattamy Homes and Meritage Homes, as well as another regional home builder that we haven't been able to list yet. And then we have three partners in terms of recruitment and distributed energy resource management, and that's Shifted Energy, Elevation Home Energy Solutions, and Energy Hub. And I mentioned Energy Hub earlier. They do a lot of aggregation of thermostats, so they'll be our thermostat aggregator on this project. Next slide. So I'm not going to go over this in great detail because, not surprisingly, you'll notice these are the same distributed energy resources that we talked about in terms of what makes distributed energy resources work and what are the opportunities for builders. So you'll notice smart thermostats, certainly we're going to have those in all homes, and they'll all be connected through Duke's current program through this DERMS platform with Energy Hub. So we'll be able to dispatch those thermostats. Water heating controls will actually be connected and managed through Shifted Energy. And those will be really primarily managed around time of use rates. will give customers daily savings on their energy bills by just managing water heating to maximize the use of it off peak and minimize use of it on peak. And by doing that, we pretty much get most of the value out of that resource without running anybody out of hot water, and that's kind of the best case scenario. We've got whole home energy monitors that'll be supplied by Curb as part of the Elevation Home Energy Solution. And those will be giving feedback to our homeowners about real-time energy use information and proactive alerts about how they can even tweak some of their settings and operate more efficiently. We'll have batteries installed in some homes that will help reduce peak usage. These will just be in a subset of homes. All new homes will have high efficiency thermal envelopes, heat pump water heaters, high efficiency air source heat pumps, and advanced duct systems. So again, that whole thermal envelope we were talking about. And then we'll have community solar and storage in one community that will have advanced inverters where we're able to attenuate that solar based on need. So these are all the things we talked about. They're all getting built into this Connected Communities project. And we're going to use this as a real vehicle to talk about this with the industry for the next 3 years. Next slide. 4 objectives. First of all, we mentioned what are utilities and what are customers in need of? Improved reliability, increased affordability, and getting to our clean energy goals. And so we want to make sure that we're thinking about those 3 things as our primary goals in this project. How can we flatten the load shape and reduce those peaks and those valleys in the T&D system so that it's an easier load to serve? How do we help customers with affordability by paying them to flex their energy and rewarding them by flexing their energy when they're on a time of use rate plan? Support. All of this is going to be done to increase the integration of renewable energy and match demand to when clean energy supplies are available. Right? So that's how we're going to get to clean. And then finally, and most importantly, I think for you guys, developing business models for new utility programs that engage with building owners, with renters, with builders, with contractors to make all of this happen. So that's really our goal, and that's why I'm excited to talk to you guys today. Next slide, and we'll talk a little bit more about the project. We will be really thinking about all of the grid services. Remember, I put that value stack slide up? That value stack is essentially these different grid services. So what are the things that distributed energy resources, what are services it's providing back to the grid? It's providing capacity during times of like very high energy use. If I call on that battery or that thermostat to reduce that load, I'm seeing additional system capacity. It's just like adding a power plant. So that's that virtual power plant. Ramping rates are really important right now. As solar comes off the system, utilities have to bring other energy resources online, and a lot of times that has to happen quickly. These resources can be dispatched immediately, and so they give us that ability to ramp very quickly. A lot of power plants take hours to heat up before they can actually be efficient at providing energy. And so this helps us with those ramping rates, helps us with the capacity value across the whole transmission and distribution system, as we've talked about. We're going to use them in a way that helps support voltage and frequency during times when those are moving because of more or less solar on the system. And then in general, using it to align when energy is used with when we have renewables. So all the things we talked about, those are all part of this project. Next slide. All right, so that was a quick overview of what is a very large and complicated project, but I want to kind of get it in and make sure I had time for a good half hour or more of question and answer. In terms of our timeline, project was awarded in 2021, originally end of 2021. It took DOE almost a year to get all of the contracts executed with the 10 teams. So we kind of kicked off the project at the end of October, started into kind of our project planning timeline, working with our partners. We are currently in customer recruitment and build out, just really started into that. And we've fully journey mapped all the customer journey maps. the T's and C's that customers would need to sign, all of those pieces, how each builder will work with enrolling customers in the program, offering it up to them. It is optional participation. So we've worked through a lot of that between the utility and our builder partners, as well as our device partners and what they need in terms of customer approvals to get and manage devices. We are hoping to start some events as early as this winter. Remember, I told you this was really focused on meeting winter peak needs. We'll be using these resources throughout the year, but they're particularly valuable for Duke in the winter peak season. And so we'll start hopefully with some events this winter, but really the timeline is set up to give us 2 full winter seasons once we're fully recruited by December of 24. And the idea is we'll have the winter season of 24-25 and 25-26. And then in January of 26, we'll kind of move towards analysis and reporting, and project timeline will finish somewhere in the fall of 26, maybe a little bit later than September. So that's what the timeline looks like. I would be interested in following along on the project with anyone who's interested with us. One of our goals for the project is make sure that folks in the built industry, the built environment industry, understand what we're doing, what the opportunities are, what our findings are. We're going to be collecting a lot of data. We're also going to be surveying customers and making sure that we fully understand sort of all angles of how this works and how customers value it. And we'll also be surveying all our participants in terms of what worked for them, how we do a better job of, making this a seamless customer experience throughout. So just really getting started with an extremely exciting project. I believe, in my experience in 30 years, that these will be some of the most efficient and grid connected and efficient buildings ever built in the United States. We're super excited about the project. And again, wanted to share this with you as well as the bigger picture of where the utility industry is heading. So with that, that's all the prepared content I had, but I'd love to continue the dialogue for just as long as folks want to. And we'll go to the next slide. I've got my contact information on here, and feel free to reach out to me, and I'm here for you as far as answering any questions right now. So thanks again for everybody for your participation today, and I'll turn it back to Mike.
All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate it much. And yes, if people do have questions, please send them in via the questions box. While I'm looking for some of those questions to come in, Tom, I do have a couple of my own. We've seen a lot of heat, high temperatures in the Southwest here. When they model PV production, what percent productivity is used? Because I can't imagine all those panels are producing at 100% levels. And given the heat domes that we've been seeing formulate over the past few years, I just wonder, how is that being factored in, especially with the massive electrification movement?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one for a lot of DERs, particularly in the Southwest, because it's so extreme. HVAC being a great example, that we have to go way above and beyond like what SEER level looks like in terms of what's real EER efficiency at those extreme temperatures, and it falls quickly in some devices. And similarly with solar production, we see that, and we're getting off the curve on some of those as we get hotter. So definitely a concern. The other thing in terms of solar that's interesting is that when you think about, you continue to add the same resource to your resource mix. And so our peak for most utilities in the Southwest, the peak actually keeps getting later in the day. And the reason is because solar's dropping off. And so eventually solar will have almost no peak capacity value, because your peak will become as soon as the sun goes down. That is when utilities will actually hit the net peak in the Southwest very soon. APS is typically looking at peaks. When I started APS 30 years ago, it was between 4 and 5 p.m. It's now between 6 and 7, moving to between 7 and 8. And so that's the effect of all that rooftop solar out there. And the fact that what we talk about in terms of the grid peak is actually the net load being supplied by everything else on the grid. And so new solar has only about single-digit % of what it says in capacity on its nameplate is actually the capacity a utility can use today. So that's how much of that resource we built, is that incremental solar is great for energy, but has almost zero capacity value now. And that's why the need for new solar coupled with storage is essential. Otherwise, solar does not have much capacity value anymore.
Well, and that leads me to a question from Elizabeth, because you talked about that we're producing more power at times than we can handle. So what is the latest that you're seeing or hearing on utility scale renewable storage?
That there is an incredible amount of it planned, under construction, and delayed, a lot of it because of supply chain issues.
Oh, no.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's being delayed because of supply chain? Okay.
Yeah, significant issues with supply chain. And so the FERC announced at the beginning, before this summer, that this next 2 or 3 years are going to be very difficult to manage peak on the grid throughout the U.S.
And who do you see as being some of the major players in that market as far as being able to supply? And I know there's supply chain issues, but who's kind of positioned themselves to really step in and be a leader in the storage capacity, or the storage sector, I should say, at that capacity?
You know, that's a little bit outside of my area of expertise. I work more on the
Okay.
distributed side. So I
Okay.
work with all of the battery providers that provide, or most of them that work with individual homeowners, but I don't work much with that utility scale stuff. That's a whole other set of folks.
Gotcha. That's fine. That's fine. We got a question from Robert. He wanted to know, for all those customers who have been recruited, what happens to them after the 2026 report? Does the project continue for them, or do all aspects, advantages just end or get abandoned?
I'm a big believer in not doing a one-off project. So the idea is that we're integrating it into Duke's current distributed resource portfolio, and that we're hopeful, we're tying it into Duke's programs so that we're hopeful that all those participants continue on beyond the project itself, and are, they all get to keep those distributed energy resources at no cost to them. And we would hope that they want to continue to get paid into the future. So hopefully they would, just continue on, but be part of just Duke's regular programs at that point.
Gotcha. Question from David. Does anyone base energy efficiency programs off of home energy score? And the kind of his follow-up question is, why do they seem to favor Energy Star, but not home energy score?
Well, I think at least in new homes, I know I've done, a lot of work with Energy Star on new homes, and it became a very easy binary. Utilities are looking for something that has brand awareness for consumers and builders and everybody else, and that's kind of an easy, is it efficient or not label, right? So Energy Star has been extremely helpful in that market. What utilities have turned towards, I think, more increasingly, is her scores in addition to just Energy Star. So not the home energy score, but home energy ratings, through ResNet, to say,
Right.
we'll give you additional rebates for some kind of a HERS scale score. So that's how I've seen most of the performance-based programs work, is kind of almost a prescriptive yes or no on Energy Star, and then additional rebates that are tied to higher HERS scores. So that's generally how they're set up for. So there is a performance basis, but it's being, modeled after in RemRate and other softwares that are producing HERS scores.
Gotcha. Okay. Final call for questions from our audience. I had one more, Tom. There's some utilities out there who will remain nameless that seem to adopt more anti-renewable policies. Let's take away net metering, or let's not encourage solar, or we're going to reimburse it wholesale versus retail or whatever. How do you break through to a company like that?
That's a great question, Mike. I'm glad you asked that, Because what I've found is that I haven't found utilities who have a bunch of anti-environmentalists working for them who want to do the wrong thing. They all want to do the right thing, actually. And they've all made a commitment. The utility industry as a whole has largely made voluntary commitments around clean because they've heard from investors, they've heard from customers, that's what they want. What utilities find, though, is that it's a very real issue that today, folks who can afford to install solar are being subsidized by customers who can't afford to install solar. It's just a fact that that's how it works. And so utilities are trying to balance between adding more solar to the system, but also understanding that they want to try to make sure that customers who can least afford to subsidize that are the ones that are borne with those costs. And what ends up happening is the less kilowatt hours that someone purchases from the utility, the more that there are some costs to serve that aren't based on variable volume of kilowatt hours sold. And so I need to now spread those same fixed costs over much smaller kilowatt hour sales. So people who don't have solar systems end up getting higher rates as a result. And so there's been a lot of discussion and debate, and there are no easy answers to that problem. Where like I contract with a lot of these utilities who are very much aware of these issues, concerned about these issues, and are coming up with programs around leasing, around the utility providing solar and actually leasing your roof space for it and giving you a bill reduction, community solar, all these ways that we can more equitably develop solar for all. So I think it's more about who's paying for it and who's subsidizing it and who can afford to, than it is about a positive or negative on solar energy. And I think that gets really misconstrued a lot.
Yeah, no, that's a good walkthrough of that kind of perspective, because I think that's sometimes missing. So appreciate that. Well, I don't see any other questions, Tom, so I want to thank you for sharing your time and your insight with us today. And also thank you to our audience for attending and asking great questions. And thank you to PowerShift by NV Energy for their generous sponsorship. Now we're going to take a little break from our webinar series, but don't fret. We'll be back basically 2 months from today when Peter Pfeiffer will join us again. That's a Housing 2.0 Thought Leader webinar, and it's going to take place on Wednesday, September 20th at our usual start time of 2 p.m. Eastern. I hope you'll come back on then. Until next time, have a great rest of your summer and relaxing Labor Day. Take care, everyone. So long.